Hello, good listeners, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Before we dig into today's story, I have an important message. We're closing in on the end of our first season of programming. At this point, we don't know if there will be a season 2. The audience feedback we're getting indicates listeners are really enjoying the stories we broadcast each week. To continue our work, we need your help. We'd love supporters and listeners to make a donation to continue the work of the archives and this program. Call 204-560-1998 during regular business hours to make a gift, or you can make a donation online. Visit mharchive.ca and click on Support. Canadian donors making a gift of $20 or more will receive a receipt for tax purposes. Thank you. And now for today's story, which takes place in 1918. It's a story about how a government official used a well-known Bible story to resolve an escalating disagreement with Mennonites in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. During World War I, Mennonites were still receiving the benefits of the privilegium. The privilegium was a Canadian government policy negotiated with Mennonites in 1873 that exempted them from military service in addition to other privileges. But in 1917, the war seemed endless. The government needed to prepare for the war to be drawn out. They needed to make sure they had the economic and human resources for an extended global conflict. So, they decided to ask every Canadian to register with the government. At first, registration was voluntary, but the response was weak, and too few people registered. A few Mennonites did fill out their national service cards in early 1917. Mennonite delegations that went to Ottawa were assured that the privilegium would be honored, but the cards had to be completed. Registered Mennonites could be excused from any conscription if the word Mennonite was written across it, and as long as their church minister verified their Mennonite identity by signing the documents. Satisfied, the delegates returned home. A year later, the issue of registration would come up again. The government then made registration mandatory by legislating the Canadian Registration Act in 1918. The Act gave authorities the power to collect information on every Canadian over age 16. The new law also required every citizen to carry their national service card at all times. But some Mennonites, with their long history of nonviolence and defiance in fighting wars, refused to register. They included the Rhinelander Mennonites, living in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, who were not convinced the promise of the privilegium would be honored in wartime. They feared that the national registration could be used to call up their young men for military service anyway. Mennonites had good reason to be concerned. Their ancestors had lost a similar privilegium made with Catherine the Great back in Imperial Russia. In fact, losing their exemption from military service in Russia was the main reason many decided to come to Canada. Mennonites were already under heavy watch since the First World War began. Speaking German set Mennonites apart even more, since Germany was considered an enemy. There was even a ban on printing in, quote, enemy languages, unquote. Police observed Mennonite church services, and Mennonite publications were censored. Some young Canadian Mennonite men even went to California to avoid registration. Government authorities were troubled by the Mennonite resistance to the registration. They feared that Mennonite refusal to register would spread to other groups. Maybe other communities would even demand military exemption. What if the war continued for years and the government didn't know how many people they could count on to fight? Philip Corbett Locke, or P.C. Locke, the superintendent of registration for Manitoba, met with some Mennonite representatives in Winnipeg. Alexander MacLeod, a lawyer from Morden representing the Rhinelander Church, also attended. The group decided to invite Mennonites from Saskatchewan and Manitoba to a meeting to discuss the matter further. The meeting was set for June 13, 1918, in Rhineland, Manitoba. P.C. Locke was under intense time pressure to resolve the matter. The government deadline for registration was June 22nd. The Rhineland meeting was scheduled to take place just 8 days before the deadline. Locke somehow had to get the Mennonites to register. At this point in our story, we get most of our details from a journal kept by P.C. Locke. It includes a long entry about his journey to Rhineland and his encounter with Mennonites that followed. Locke arrived in Rhineland around 10 a.m., with the understanding that the meeting would happen at 11 a.m. But, just a few miles outside of Rhineland, Locke and his company noticed a long stream of horses and buggies leaving town. After questioning some of the people departing, Locke learned that the meeting had already taken place at 6 a.m., and the Mennonites had come to a decision. They would not register for National Service cards. The reason they gave was that, quote, the Lord would not let them, unquote. Locke felt betrayed. He had made the journey to Rhineland in good faith. His understanding was that everyone in the church would meet with him to make a decision. What he didn't know was that traditionally, non-members of the Rhinelander church were not allowed to participate in decision-making meetings. Some church elders said that Locke was only coming to Rhineland to find out the decision in person. It's possible the elders had intended to invite Locke to meet with them after the church members' meeting to explain their decision, and that Locke had misunderstood. But when Locke questioned the meeting time mix-up, he didn't get a direct answer. Locke was not one to give up easily. He had close ties to the Mennonite community and considered some of them his friends. One such friend was Peter Harms, a member of the Rhinelander church. Upon further questioning of the men leaving the church meeting, Locke was told to go to Peter Harms' house, where he would be welcomed. Harms had invited the bishops and the church ministers to his home to continue the conversation with Locke and his officials. Here, Harms assured Locke that they were, quote, not deliberately defying the Dominion government, unquote. But it may have felt like defiance to Locke. In his limited German, he tried every argument he could think of to convince the Mennonites to register. The Mennonites responded in their limited English. Bishop Wall of Rosthern, Saskatchewan, interpreted for both groups. Alexander MacLeod, the lawyer representing the Rhinelander Church, told Locke that he would not be able to change the Mennonites' minds. Time wore on, and both sides remained steadfast in their opposing positions. Having tried persuasion, the determined P.C. Locke turned to threats. He told the Mennonites that refusing to register would mean stiff penalties. Their possessions could be confiscated, they could face fines, or even be jailed. The bishops countered Locke's argument. One elderly bishop said, "You cannot put every Mennonite in jail." "No," said Locke, "but I can guarantee that you and every man present in this room who fails to register on the 22nd of June will be imprisoned on the 23rd. Unfazed, the bishop replied, "If we don't register, any man of us whom you want will report to Mr. MacLeod's office at Morden on the morning of the 23rd, ready to go to jail." Locke repeated his threats of confiscation, fines, and prison. The bishop responded by offering to bring the titles for their farms, their bank books, and even lists of livestock. Locke began to understand that Mennonites didn't fear the consequences of refusing to register. Their principles were too strong. They were willing to make deep sacrifices, and even offered to help make legal charges easy on officials. Throughout the meeting, the Mennonite leaders made it clear that they understood Locke was just doing his job. They insisted that their refusal to cooperate was not out of spite, but based on their principles and values. Earlier in the meeting, Locke had spotted a Bible on a nearby desk. He knew that the Bible was held in the highest regard among Mennonites. He recalled his own Sunday school lessons. Locke took the Bible in hand and read the first 5 verses of Luke chapter 2, first in his scanty German, and then again translating it into English. Locke read the story to the group about the ruler Caesar Augustus, who ordered the registration of every citizen in the entire Roman world. In the ancient story, Mary and Joseph obeyed the law and traveled to Bethlehem to register. Locke then asked if his translation was accurate, and Peter Harms replied, yes, it was. Locke said, "This government is only asking you the same thing that Caesar Augustus asked the earthly father and mother of our Lord to do, and they did so. Will you listen to this passage from St. Luke?" The Bible reading stirred the Mennonites to talk amongst themselves, and as they did so, they reconsidered their positions. Like Mary and Joseph, maybe they too could obey the law without betraying their spiritual calling. The Bible story seemed to offer everyone a way to meet their obligations. Finally, an elder bishop walked over to the center of the room and in a shaky voice spoke for the group. "Mr. Locke, we are deeply obliged to you. You have shown us the truth." They apologized for the trouble they had caused Locke and agreed to register. To add sincerity to their apology, they offered their own young people to do the registration work for free. Locke was relieved that he would not have to carry out his threats of legal charges. In gratitude, he declined their offer of free help and said he'd rather pay them. With an agreement in place, the meeting ended, and the leaders from Saskatchewan left to prepare for their long journey home. The Mennonites kept their promise to register, and the process went smoothly, and, as it turns out, the most complete registration in any part of Canada was from the Rhinelander Mennonites. Now, you might think this is the end of our story, but there's more. Almost 100 years later, the Canadian government called on the story of Mary and Joseph again. Prior to the census of 2011, the Manitoba Bureau of Statistics sent a letter to Mennonite Church Canada. The letter once again recalled the story of Mary and Joseph from Luke chapter 2, and on this basis asked church leaders to encourage Mennonites to cooperate fully in the upcoming census. Conrad Stace, archivist at the Mennonite Heritage Archives, asked the Bureau about the letter. He recounted the story from 1918 and how P.C. Locke had used the Bible to encourage registration. Stace wondered if the two incidents were connected. Wilf Falk, the chief statistician for the Manitoba Bureau at the time, replied that no, the biblical reference was original and independent of the 1918 story. Most of this story comes from the book Rhineland, An Experience in Community, which is held at the Mennonite Heritage Archives in Winnipeg. The use of the biblical story for the 2011 census is found in the Mennonite Heritage Archives' own magazine, The Mennonite Historian. To learn more and see images related to the story, or to listen to this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. We're always happy to receive any comments and questions about this program. Contact us by email at info@mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
In upcoming episodes, you'll hear the story of Susanna Miller, and I'll be talking with author and humorist Andrew Unger, whom many listeners will know from his satire website, The Unger Review. This episode was researched by Conrad Stace and Caitlin Jansen and written by Caitlin Jansen. David Klippenstein makes sure each episode finds its way online. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back soon with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.